Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Tim Stoddart. I live in Nashville with my wife and my son and our pit bull named Alice. Today, we are doing another book review. Last week, I finished a great book called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. I have published the notes of the book on my website, timstodds.com, but I like to do videos of book reviews as well because it allows me to be a little bit more conversational. I thought this book was fascinating. Simply put, the author goes into, I'd say the author makes an argument that investing and finances is not a science, but rather it's predicated on human behavior. And the sooner we can understand human behavior and get to the bottom of why people make the decisions that they do, rather than what people decide to do, we can have better utility over our own finances, our own time, and control of our lives, and also just control of how the economy as a whole affects us emotionally. So it's a very quick book. I like how we broke down the chapters into really quick, concise statements. In this book, there was 20 chapters, but the last two chapters were sort of his own personal thoughts, and there were more or less 18, let's call them rules of human psychology. So in this video, we're going to go through all 18 of these rules really quickly, and I hope it gives you a better understanding as to how these psychological classifications can in fact affect your own investments. Okay, first off, no one is crazy. Everybody has their own personal experiences, and 98% of how we view the world is predicated on what we have been through. So for one person, buying a lottery ticket might be viewed as crazy. For another person, buying a lottery ticket might be like their only way out of whatever circumstance they're in. So taking a step back and realizing that everybody is making financial decisions based on their own perspective and their own experiences is very important. Number one, no one is crazy. Number two, understanding luck and risk. It's important to understand in this section that nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems. And oftentimes people make huge generalizations based on specific case studies. So luck always has something to do with it, and risk always has something to do with it, but you can mediate your risk by investing in principles and not investing in trends. So trends are the ups and downs of the news cycle, right? But the principles of investing really, really stay the same. So the way to mediate luck and risk is to invest in principles and not in trends. Number three, understanding that for human beings, it's never enough. There's centers in our brain that are hundreds of thousands of years old that are still wired to grab whatever is in front of them. It's why we love sugar so much. It's why anytime there's like food or abundance, we all like to gobble it up as much as possible because a couple 100,000 years ago, our ancestors didn't know the next time that they were going to see an opportunity like this. So in today's modern world, where abundance is everywhere and everybody more or less has opportunities to create abundance in their lives, the trick is to make the goalpost stop moving. This is why people always leave the casino losing money, even though at one point they may have been up on the blackjack table. This is why lottery winners always go broke. This is why even really successful business people sometimes don't know when to get out of the game and they end up getting broke. So understanding the deep-rooted survival mechanisms in our brain plays a really huge role in allowing people to make better decisions with their money and getting the goalposts to stop moving and seeing when, like, you know what, this is good, this is enough, I'm fulfilled. Number four is a section on compounding. This is such an important chapter because it's difficult for us to conceptualize how much of the gains in investing is made over a very short time frame at the very end. Right, a lot of the gains are linear and linear and linear, and then all of a sudden they explode. So one of the obvious examples was Warren Buffett, and I think he was worth like $60 billion or something along those lines. This isn't perfectly accurate, but in the chapter, he broke down how like 55 billion of his dollars have been made in the last 10 years of his investing career. And so getting a grip on compounding makes it very easy to make more reasonable decisions in the short term, because you understand that the choice that you have today needs to add up a little bit until eventually it hits that peak point where compounding really starts to kick in. Number 5, the difference between getting wealthy and staying wealthy. This is one of the most fascinating chapters because there are two completely different skill sets in getting wealthy and staying wealthy. To stay wealthy, you need to have some kind of combination of frugality mixed with paranoia. The same risk mindset and go-getter mindset that gets you wealthy is not the same mindset that's going to keep you wealthy. To stay wealthy, you need to be a little bit paranoid and very frugal. Number 6, I love the name of this chapter. It was called Tails You Win. The concept is that you can be wrong more than half the time and still make a fortune. There's a popular concept that I live a lot of my life by called the Pareto principle. The scientist named something Pareto made the discovery that 20% of everything basically has 80% of the resources. So this is true if you look at the size of stars. 20% of the stars take up 80% of the mass in the entire universe. And this is true with trees in the rainforest. In the Amazon, about 20% of the trees gobble up about 80% of the sunlight. This is also true with personal finance. About 20% of the things you do will account for 80% of the gains. So it's okay to be wrong. You have to be comfortable with the fact that you only need one winner, because it's those long tails. That's why the chapter is called Tails You Win. It's those real long tail effects of a lot of different options everywhere that are actually going to somehow get to the point where the one or two huge winners are the ones that are going to account for most of your financial gains in investing. Chapter 7 was called Freedom. This was my personal favorite chapter because this is something that I've struggled with in my life. And the idea is that the only thing that money can actually buy is time. More money doesn't buy happiness, but more money does buy time. And having control and utility of your time is actually a huge correlation towards happiness. What makes people unhappy is not having control over their decisions. And when you get to do what you want, when you want, the way you want to do it, meaning you have complete utility of your time, that really, really is a key indicator in happiness. And so the reason why we make investments and the reason why we want to become financially independent is so we have complete control over our time. Chapter 8 is called The Man in the Car Paradox. This is very simple. Nobody thinks that your fancy car is as cool as you think it is. We buy these status symbols because we want to appeal to everybody else. But in reality, no one gives a shit about your car. When you get out of your car, people might notice the car, but they hardly ever notice you. And they hardly ever make correlations between you and your status symbols. Really, we buy status symbols because they make us feel like we mean something when it's a complete fabrication. So the man in the car paradox is very important, and it's important to understand that nobody cares about your stuff as much as you do. So you might as well spend your money and your energy investing in your freedom of your time, which we talked about in the last chapter. Chapter 9 is called Wealth is What You Don't See. People buy things to feel wealthy, but when you buy things, you're actually just indicating that you're rich. True wealth is the nights of peaceful sleep. True wealth is when an emergency happens and you have the money and you have the resources that it doesn't create a huge significant burden in your life. So the people that are really wealthy are actually not the ones that you notice because they're just busy being wealthy and not worried about appearing as though they're rich. Chapter 10 made me feel really good. It was all about saving money. And the idea is that you don't need a reason to save money. There's a lot of debate in financial guru circles, let's call them, about how much money do you actually need to save? Should you invest all of your money? How frugal do you need to be? You can't bring your money. When you die, you can't bring your money with you, right? And there are some really, really cool examples here just about how much value it is for people to have a big stash of cash that they need, because some shit will always happen that you don't expect. So you don't need a reason to save money. A lot of times you think about saving money as goal oriented. Like I want to save for this vacation, or like I want to save to put down a deposit on this house for an investment. But in reality, the best way to go about doing it is just to save money for the sake of saving money. Because when you do that, you give yourself options. And it doesn't mean that you can't use some of that money for your investments. It just means that you don't need to have an actual reason for it. So just save money, and you will give yourself opportunities in the future. Chapter 11 was such a cool breakdown over the value of being reasonable as opposed to being rational. There were some great technical examples in here in this chapter as to rational decisions that don't actually make sense for us to make in our lives. There's a really great example where a scientist, he discovered that you could really help curing syphilis in the 1800s by giving people really, really intense fevers, and how there's actually a lot of value in our immune systems for fevers, because the heat in our body, our rising body temperatures just kills so many different types of germs. And so it's it's very rational to think you're sick, you're going to be fine, just keep your fever. But it's not a reasonable thing to do, because why would I want to have a fever when I don't have to? Why would I want to be sick and be in pain and have all this stress? So although that example doesn't necessarily equate to finances directly, it was a great frame of reference for me to see where okay, there are plenty of examples where the rational thing to do, what the numbers tell you to do, right? What the rational decision is, doesn't necessarily mean it's the right decision, because I'm a person and I have emotions and I have things that I want to do. And so a lot of times focusing on being reasonable is much more applicable than being rational. Chapter 11 was called Surprise. There's a great quote in here, which I'm just going to read to you directly. We use the past as a guideline for the future. However, things that have never happened happen all the time. So much of what we do in finances, the science of managing the economy, is based around things that have already happened. But it's never the things that have already happened which are the things that are gonna pop up in the middle of the night. They're not the things that we have to worry about. So history is nothing more than the study of surprising events. And if you treat your finances with some grace, I suppose, you give yourself some grace to understand that most of the things that are going to screw you up are things that you never could expect. It's a much easier way to live your life and to manage your money, because we plan for the future, but all of our plans are based on things that have already happened. And the things that have already happened aren't going to be the things that are going to happen. So the lesson is to have the money and not need it, rather than to need the money and not have it. You have to plan for surprises. You have to plan for things that you can't plan for. Chapter 13 was called Room for Error. In a lot of finance circles, you have a margin of safety. And a lot of times, the margin of safety gives you a little bit of cushion. Well, in almost every circumstance, when we make financial progressions, we don't account for a margin of error. We don't account for a margin of safety. And so everything we do, we have to basically assume that we could be off either positively, like things can go better than we expect, or things most likely will go worse than we expect. So everything we do, we have to account for a margin of error. And the way that he calls it in the book is he calls it a margin of safety. You're creating a cushion. And it's better to behave in ways that allows you to have a cushion. Chapter 14 was simply called Youll Change. This was really cool because it accounts for human behavior in a way that I don't think we talk about or we recognize enough as a society. Lives change. What matters to me today isn't necessarily something that mattered to me in the past, and the things that I might care about in the future may not be the things that I care about now. So it's all right for us to treat money and to treat our finances with some flexibility, and for us to ally like dynamic behaviors with how we manage our money. Because at the end of the day, you only get one life. And so it's much better to just go with the flow and accept the fact that your plans are going to change based on what your interests are, than it is to be super regimented all the time and say like, no, this is my plan and I'm sticking with it. Because you don't want to look back with regrets. You want to accept the fact that you're a person and that you're going to change, and that your interests are going to change, and your values are going to change, and your family relationships are going to change. So you just have to expect that the things you care about will change over time. Number 15, nothing is free. This was one of my favorite chapters because it made me feel better about a lot of my insecurities. I don't know if there's such a thing as a professional investor. If there is such a thing, I'm not one of them. I teach myself how to invest in the stock market. I teach myself how to invest in startup companies and private companies and in other funds. And so a lot of times when I have losses, I think to myself, oh God, like, why am I doing this? Like, I suck at this. But everybody has those losses, and it's better to see your losses, even if it's like a market fluctuation. You know, like even if you buy a stock and that particular stock goes down and you picked a loser, you know, like I bought Dogecoin when I shouldn't have, and I'm down like $3,000, right? So it's better for me to see that $3,000 loss is really just a fee that I have to pay to play the game, because playing the game costs something. There's no way to get out of here without some bumps and bruises and some calluses and taking some L's. So as soon as like we're able to accept in our minds that just the very act of playing the game costs us resources, it's going to cost us time, it's going to cost us money, it's going to cost us stress, we're better off. So nothing is free, and it's better to not necessarily look at these things as losses or mistakes, but just to see them as the fee that we have to pay to play the game. Chapter 16 was called You and Me, and I thought this was so interesting. There's some really cool studies that he cited about why bubbles happen. And it's an oversimplification, but weird bubbles in the market happen because people that are interested in one thing are making certain decisions, and people that are interested in another thing are making those same decisions without realizing that the people who are also making those decisions don't want what they want, right? So you have a lot of different people, all that have a lot of different intentions. And when we generalize a market, you know, let's just use the housing crisis. You know, when we generalize the fact that there's really quick money to be made, we don't understand that all of the different variables in there are based on the intention of all of the different people playing the game. So you have to go into these things understanding that what I want out of whatever investment or financial decision that I made has nothing to do with what everybody else wants. And so sometimes, even though I can get what I want out of it, it's better to stay out of it, because what all the other people want might screw it up for me. And so the more of a filter you can see through, the better off you will be, because you realize that everybody is after their own self-interest. And that's okay. It's just important to recognize. Chapter 17 was called The Seduction of Pessimism. I thought this was so cool because it made it easier for me to understand why bad news travels so fast. So things that are good take a long time to be good, because progress is slow moving. You know, like it takes a long time to build a house. It only takes a split second for a house to crumble down or for a house to blow up, right? And so it is the instantaneous nature of bad things happening that makes it so that pessimism can spread. And so many people make bad financial decisions based on pessimism. You know, the market is going to collapse. Inflation is at an all-time high. We're hitting a new housing bubble. So many bad stories and so many pessimistic views are out there because we're attracted to these pessimistic views just because of like the the instantaneous nature of them. But if you go back to chapter 1 and even chapter 2, and you realize that everybody is looking at the world from their own perspective, it makes it a lot easier not to make rash decisions based on something being really good, like an optimistic viewpoint, or most likely something being really bad, which is a pessimistic viewpoint. You follow the macro trends of the big picture, and you'll be much better off in the long run if you're able to like avoid pessimism and see it for what it really is. And then the final chapter 18, was called When You'll Believe Anything. This was so interesting because he summarized the idea that money is nothing more than the stories that we tell. Telling stories is quite literally baked into our DNA. I don't know if anybody's ever read the book Sapiens, right? But the biggest thing that makes human beings unique from the rest of the animals on the planet is that we're able to apply narratives to things. We're able to apply underlying stories and reasoning behind them. And so the solution here is you just embrace the shit show. You just embrace the mess. You embrace the uncertainty, and you let your internal narration be the guiding light of your behavior. There's a ton of really cool examples he used on markets going up and going down based on nothing but stories and narratives. You know, for me, Bitcoin is a good example here. Ethereum is a good example here. Just decentralization of blockchain in general is a really good example. In other parts of our history, we could all account for different stories that have had huge impacts on finances and markets. And so like I said, if you just accept that and you just embrace that mess and you embrace that shit show, the less influenced you will be by the giant story of it all, and you won't have to pull meaning from it. All right, there we go. That's all 18 chapters. I highly recommend you read this book. It's called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. I'll have a link in the description of this video. I'll also have my personal notes in the description of this video. I broke down all the chapters that we just talked about, but I also have about 20 or 30 quotes from the book that really stood out to me that I highlighted. Please subscribe. Please let me know what you thought of the book. Let me know if this book helped you, if you liked it, if you hated it. I'd really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.